If you're a regular Geeks Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And I want to give a special thank you to Jay Lebo, who just gave us this 5-star review. I found Geeks Guide about 6 months ago. I've been a secret in-the-closet nerd my entire life, but have really let it fly over the last few years. Geeks Guide is now home. David, the panelists, the book and movie recommendations are amazingly in line with everything I like. Keep them coming. I've listened to about 60% of the episodes so far and never want to reach 100%. I'm also a small Patreon subscriber now to the show. Love you all and keep crushing it geek style. So big thanks again to Jay Lebo for that great review. Alright, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 503 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing Season 1 of the Apple TV Plus series Foundation, based on the novels by Isaac Asimov. And this will include spoilers for all 10 episodes, so just be aware of that. And we previously discussed Asimov's novels Foundation and Foundation and Empire back in episode 434, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up we've got Anthony Ha, making his 27th appearance on the show. He's a writer and longtime tech journalist living in Harlem. A chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by the small press Youth in Decline in 2014, and his fiction has also appeared in Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet. He's the co-host of the podcast Original Content and the comics interview series Panel to Panel. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be back.
Then next up we've got John Kessel, making his 7th appearance on the show. He's the author of novels such as The Moon and the Other and Pride and Prometheus, and short story collections such as The Pure Product and The Bomb Plan for Financial Independence. His collection The Dark Ride, the best short fiction of John Kessel, will be out in June. So John, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
And also joining us today is Abby Goldsmith, who you may remember from our panel on the Foundation novels back in episode 434, and our panel on Season 1 of Upload back in episode 457. She's a co-host of the Stories for Nerds podcast, and her short fiction has appeared in Escape Pod and Fantasy Magazine. Her Torth series of space opera novels are available now on Wattpad, where they've racked up over 65,000 reads. So Abby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back on.
Okay, so let's start off with Anthony, and have you tell us about your expectations going into this Foundation TV show.
They were very, very high. I love the books, particularly the original series, and I knew that David Goyer was going to be the showrunner who he hasn't, I think he has a pretty mixed track record, but has definitely worked on some interesting projects like the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, and he was saying all the right things in terms of really, appreciating and valuing Asimov's stories. So, and I got the sense also that Apple was spending a lot of money on the show. So I was just excited also to see a big budget adaptation of the Foundation stories. So I certainly had some trepidation because I wasn't totally clear on how you could actually adapt the Foundation stories in a way that wasn't deeply uncinematic. But I was also very excited. Oh, and then also Jared Harris, I just think is a terrific actor. And so when I found out he was playing Harry Seldon, that definitely intensified my excitement.
Yeah. So the main reason we had a lot of trepidation about this show, right, is because this is a story, Asimov story, that unfolds over decades, centuries, and so each story or whatever, each episode jumps forward in time. So we're all kind of like, wait, is this going to have completely different characters? Are they going to change the cast? Is it going to be like an anthology show where they change the cast completely every episode or every couple episodes, right? So there's a lot of trepidation around how that was all going to work out, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Abby, what were your expectations going into the show?
I mean, the same trepidation there, where I was like, how are they going to adapt this? I think this has got to be one of the most difficult stories to adapt for the screen ever. So, I wasn't sure how they'd be able to pull it off. I didn't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also with any classic science fiction show, there's always a lot of trepidation too about just like, is this going to be a travesty? I mean,
yeah.
With Asimov specifically, you have the Will Smith I, Robot movie. You have I don't know if anyone ever saw it. There was this Nightfall movie. It was pretty terrible. I mean, it seems like a lot of these things they seem to go out of their way to have the theme be the exact opposite of whatever the source material was.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Abby, did you ever see iRobot or Nightfall or any of those things?
Yeah, I did see iRobot. Yeah.
I remember with iRobot mostly, I don't remember all the details, but I remember there were hordes of murderous robots running wild.
Right.
That was so anti-Asimov that really was a travesty.
Yeah. Well, and there was, I mean, it was particularly bad with that because there was this screenplay that Harlan Ellison had written that had been blessed by Asimov. So, the fact that that didn't go anywhere was pretty disappointing. And then, and that Asimov's whole motivation for writing the robot stories initially was because he wanted to do something different than the robots running amok and killing everybody. And so to have the story largely turned into that, it's just like, it just makes you so nervous for what these things are how these things are going to turn out.
I was worried with Foundation that the books just aren't very cinematic, and they don't have the kind of, even though Asimov himself said that he was trying to do a kind of swashbuckling, star-spanning galactic adventure, he wasn't that kind of writer. And so, it didn't have a lot of space battles and individual physical conflicts and, explosions and super science even. And so I thought, well, how are they going to do this? And one of the things I worried about is that, I didn't see how they could do it without making serious changes to what Asimov did. And I was in favor of serious changes because I thought that was the only way it was going to work.
Yeah, I was taking serious changes for granted pretty much. I mean, I think it would be interesting if they were to do some sort of anthology thing where the characters actually are changing generations by generation. But I just think there's all sorts of practical reasons why that was almost certainly not going to happen. So I was really curious to see how they would handle that. And then the first trailer I saw actually looked really good. I mean, the production values looked great. But I was sort of confused because, it was all about Harry Seldon. It was, mostly about Harry Seldon, and it looked like Gail Dornick was in there too. And I wasn't sure exactly who the other people all were. But I mean, that initial trailer at least probably made me about as optimistic as any trailer could have. But so then, I don't know. Anthony, what do you think about that? What did you think? Did you watch all the trailers before they were coming out?
I did. Both because I was writing about the show for TechCrunch, and also just because I was very curious. And I think that the trailers looked great, and you could see the production value, and you could already start to see some of the changes that they made, like the fact that Gail Dornick, who is a man in the book, has been recast as a young woman of color. And, you could tell that just in general, the universe was more diverse than Asimov's was, but it was hard to tell how much of the core ideas would survive the translation. So the trailers made me very excited, but that nervousness didn't completely go away either.
When you say that you were writing about it for TechCrunch, what sort of things were you writing?
Mostly just that because there was so much curiosity about Apple's streaming strategy. And when Foundation was first announced, we knew that Apple was working on a quote unquote Netflix competitor, but it didn't even have a name yet. We didn't know it was going to be called TV Plus. Exactly what kinds of content it would include was sort of unclear. And so a lot of it was sort of just trying to see how this fit into Apple's broader streaming strategy, while also kind of indulging the fan part of my brain, which was just saying, hey, this looks really cool. I hope they don't screw this up.
Yeah, I mean, that's my impression, is that they really put a lot of money into this, and they really wanted this to be a major, this wasn't just part of their slate of offerings, that this was really sort of their attempt to make something that would entice people to sign up for Apple TV, like to be their Game of Thrones or like whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my sense as well.
Yeah. So Abby, so when you sit down to watch the first episode, kind of what were your initial impressions?
Yeah, I mean, I was really pleasantly, like you said, the production value was pretty amazing. I thought they got really original with the artwork, with the 3D effects. I really hadn't seen anything like that before, and I do like good eye candy and good special effects. So that hooks me right in. They had a good original score of music. The acting was really good. And so I was like, okay, I'm actually really digging this. It doesn't, I think they're even making an attempt to kind of follow the book a little bit. So I was kind of really impressed. Yeah.
When you say you'd never seen things like this before, like, are there any specific thing, like images or scenes or something?
The opening titles, and basically the 3D, holographic projections, the effects they did for that, with the kind of sparkling, almost like it was like sand. They got pretty creative with that. Usually holographic projection.
You're talking about the title sequence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they also used it throughout the series. I can't remember if it was in the first episode or not.
Uh-huh. But yeah, so in the title sequence, there's these sort of the image that sticks out to me is there's this emperor, and so there's these kind of like figures of the emperor stretching off into the distance, and then they're like, they seem to be made out of some sort of sand or something that's kind of blowing away. Yeah. And so it's sort of symbolic of this crumbling empire dissolving to dust or slowly wasting away. So I thought the title sequence was super cool. Yeah. So then how about John, what were your initial impressions of that first episode?
Well, production values were obviously sank a lot of money into it. So I was heartened by that. But, as it is with most science fiction, it's really about the writing that makes the issue. And so it took me a while to being an old dude who's read, Asimov so many years ago, but then reread it. I was, paying attention to what things they were following, and I was wondering what they would not follow. And so it was very interesting to me once we got into the story, how some things were taken from his work, and then others were completely invented. But I found the inventions really quite interesting. Okay, they added a depth to the story that I don't think was there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I had a really positive impression of that first episode. I mean, that's one of the moments that sticks out to me the most from the book is that initial scene where Harry Seldon is kind of on trial before the Galactic Empire, and he's accused of sedition or trying to undermine confidence in the Empire. And he says, well, I've according to my psychohistorical projections, this decline is inevitable and everything. And so I was really looking forward to seeing that. And I thought they did a really good job with that. I mean, and then they sort of made a change as far as I remember, which is that in the book, as far as I remember, the Gail Dornick character is basically just there as a witness. And they changed it so that she's sort of been brought to the Empire because they're hoping that she's going to denounce Harry Seldon and disprove his theories. And so they basically say, we're going to kill you if you don't denounce Harry Seldon. And all that was new as far as I remember. I guess I'll say, if you didn't listen to our previous Foundation panel, I only read the book once, and it was about a year ago or more. So, I'm not probably...
No, that was definitely added. And I was delighted that they switched Gail to be a female character. All this stuff had more complexity to it, I think, than it had in the original Asimov stories.
Yeah. So that first episode, I really had a very positive impression of. But yeah, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that they're adding a lot of stuff and changing a lot of stuff. So one of the big changes is that the Emperor is a clone. So Abby, why don't you tell us about that? What did you think of this clone emperor thing?
I thought it was a good idea. I was like, well, you have I didn't know yet that how they were going to show the story, but if you have a giant story spanning millenniums, then to have a clone, you can have a lot of continuity. So, you could be. I was wondering if they were going to have them download the same memories into the clone, and have it like almost be the exact same person again and again and again. I thought it was a good change. I liked how they did it.
Yeah, I actually and this is not from the book at all. So the idea in the show is that the Emperor is a succession of clones going back to Cleon the First, and so there are always 3 clones alive at a time. So there's the one who's sort of in the prime of his adulthood, who's the ruler, and then there's the older one who serves as a wise advisor, and then there's the younger one who's being groomed to take over once he comes of age. And then when a new one is born, the older one sort of ritually ends his life. And so there's always the 3, and they call themselves Dawn and Day and Dusk, depending on where in this cycle they are. So Anthony, what'd you think of this genetic dynasty thing?
I loved it. I thought it was probably my favorite addition to my favorite element that the writers introduced for the show. I thought all the performances were great. I thought the way they developed that idea across the whole season was really compelling. I mean, even at the beginning, they have a lot of really nice touches where, I just went back and rewatched the first episode, and the way that each of the actors mimics and mirrors the behavior of the others is really well done. And then over time, it feels like you see actually, because it does feel like in a way a kind of cinematic shortcut, because it's a way of like, great, we're going to cover decades and eventually centuries, but we can still have Lee Pace and other actors as the Emperor the whole time. But it seems like they'd really thought through of like what some of the emotional implications would be, what some of the logistical elements would be, what some of the ritualistic elements would be, and even and maybe this is getting a little bit too far ahead, but I almost felt like the Emperor storyline was more interesting than any of the things that were more directly related to the Asimov material.
Yeah, I agree with that. The Emperor storyline was definitely my favorite part of the show. Yeah, even though it doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with Asimov's ideas, but I mean, I think it works really well, and is natural enough that I think that if someone had no familiarity with the book, that it wouldn't seem contrived to them at all. It would just seem like an organic part of the story. It wouldn't occur to them like, oh, they did this so that they could have the same actor, decade after decade.
I thought it was very clever in that it sort of killed 2 birds with 1 stone, in that, yes, it gave a continuity to the Emperor, so you could have the same actors go over hundreds of years. But then also they used it to justify or to rationalize the reason why the Empire is becoming stale. It's becoming stagnant because it's sort of mortared into this the same. He's called Empire, okay, throughout the whole thing. It's as if he were the personal embodiment of the Empire, and if it never changes, then that you could see how that could be a problem, and so that sort of dovetails into Asimov's idea of the decline of the Empire.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to get into this now, but I sort of had mixed feelings about that specifically. I guess I'll just go into it now. I mean, I feel like one of the things that science fiction does is that it presents different ways that society could operate and makes us think about them. And I always dislike it, particularly with clones or something like that, where there's just this sort of reflexive, like, oh, they're bad. That's not natural. Like, the way things are is better. Let's not change anything. And so I felt like this show fell into that a little bit, where I would have liked to see at least a little exploration of the idea. Is it good to clone yourself? Are there upsides? Like, would people who were, this tripartite clone family, would they sort of have social support and, feel at peace with themselves in a way that might make what we think of as normal people, non-clones, seem lonely and adrift or something. So I felt like the anti-clone thing was very just sort of reflexive, and I would have liked to see it be a little more nuanced, but
actually, I don't disagree with that. Can we talk about later episodes, or is that something you want to avoid?
Well, let's avoid the sort of the young clone dilemma thing for the moment. But if there's anything else you want to, if there's anything else, I was
thinking about that episode where the Empire goes to the religious planet and he undergoes this ordeal to sort of prove his humanity.
Uh-huh.
And that ends with, basically, I mean, I don't like the idea really that you say that a clone isn't really a human being or doesn't have a soul. It's like saying an identical twin doesn't have a soul. That's essentially what you're saying. Okay. It's silly. And so, I don't buy that.
Yeah. So Abby, what do you think about my idea of clone rights here?
I mean, yeah, they kind of dehumanized them a bit, and I agree about, saying he doesn't have a soul because he's been cloned so many times. On the other hand, I do like the idea of they're steeped in this tradition. I thought it was more about their culture, their tradition, that they never change. This rigid, unchanging culture. And they're so cloistered away from the rest of humanity that they're not really part of the changing of whatever progress that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that was sort of the other issue I had, was that I felt like it made it seem like the problem of the Galactic Empire was that they have these clone rulers and they're like bad rulers. And, if they had different rulers, things would be better. And the impression I had from this story, which I thought was more interesting, was just that this was more of a civilizational, cultural decline, that it's like the kids are just spending too much time on their phones and it's like ruining everything. It's not something that could be changed or that could be fixed by just replacing one emperor. And so like when Harry Seldon says, the decline is inevitable, there's going to be at least 1,000 years of darkness no matter what happens. It's not clear to me why the situation would be so dire if so much of it stems from the particular individual who's leading. Like if that's the whole problem, it seems like that's kind of an easy fix. So I thought there was a little bit of a contradiction or something between this idea that the civilization is declined versus like so much of the fault of it is because of these three people who happen to be at the top of the pyramid. But Anthony, what do you think about that?
I agree. I mean, I do think that they gesture towards that a little, that in the initial episode, what Harry says is that you can, he explicitly says you could actually stave off the collapse of the empire by a few centuries if you end the genetic dynasty, but it's still inevitable. The empire will still fall. So the show is positioning it as not just the genetic dynasty, but at the same, I agree also that you don't really get a sense of what the other reasons would be if it's not the cloning. And I think in general, that's something the show struggles with and loses from the stories, in the sense that that in the stories, fundamentally, individual action doesn't matter that much. It's all about these clashing socio-historical forces. And in the show, it's really all about individual action. And psychohistory becomes this kind of magic that can predict individual action. And in almost every case, it really is about like a hero kind of coming in to save the day in a way that was predicted by psychohistory. And so I think, I mean, I understand why they made that change. If you make a show where you're just like, the hero doesn't matter, individuals don't matter, that is both a bleak and perhaps not particularly dramatically interesting show. But it did feel like there was a real loss in that adaptation choice.
Yeah. I was going to try to stave off my ranting a little longer than this. But
set you up perfectly.
Yeah, I guess we might as well just get into it. Is that, yeah, like I said, I had a very positive initial impression of the show. I thought the first episode was good, and I thought the genetic dynasty idea was interesting. I thought it was really clever how they found ways to have the cast continue through time. Like one's a clone, or like a succession of clones. One's an immortal robot. One kind of becomes a AI hologram. Two of them sort of get frozen cryogenically and come back, and so I was like, oh, this is actually pretty clever. But then the big problem I had with the show really was that it didn't seem very Asimovian to me, in the sense that to my mind, Asimov's whole appeal is that you sort of see smart people being rational. And I'm kind of like, if I wanted to see like hot people expressing strong emotions and doing cool athletic stuff, I could watch anything on TV, right? I go to Asimovian science fiction because I want to see nerds saving the universe with math, right? And I feel like that just kind of got lost in this, that I wanted to see smart people doing smart things. And it just sort of started feeling very generic, I felt like I was watching like Stargate Atlantis or something. There was just so much like mysticism and, so many like shootouts and stuff like that. So as much as, I think they did actually preserve a lot of the lore from Foundation, but to me it kind of missed the heart of the stories, which is the celebration of the intellect. So that's my. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, that's one of the things actually that disappointed me was, psychohistory was a cool idea, and I was a physics major, and so to me it was thermodynamics. It was saying you can't predict, no one can predict what one atom or one molecule is going to do, but if you have several billion of them or trillion of them in a box, the laws of thermodynamics will predict exactly what happens. And so I thought he was using that as an analogy for the number of people in the galaxy. Now there's trillions of people in the galaxy. And so Harry Seldon has this mathematical way of predicting the future. And I thought that's in the TV show. But then at the end, they bring in, which I don't think is in any of the books, the idea that you have certain characters who can foresee the future. Okay, like I think Salvor Hardin and Gale both. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's completely vitiating the power of the idea of the mathematics there. Of course, mathematics is not very sexy, so maybe that's why they did that. But it sort of felt like it was again sort of going against the whole premise of the psychohistory.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And so I just would have wanted to see more like, I don't know, like House of Cards style, because like the stuff that really sticks out in my memory from that first book is like where I think it's Salvor Hardin, the leader of the mayor of the Foundation, he sort of like implies to the barbarian enemies that they have nuclear weapons when they don't really, and they sort of like start this fake Foundation religion that staves off one of the invasions and stuff like that. And so they're being canny and clever and conniving, and they know that it's just this group of scientists. They know that they can't win militarily, and so they have to win through their intellect. And yeah, I just felt like the Foundation people in the show never really did anything that smart, it seemed to me. But Abby, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, I totally agree that, the mathematics, that like having these suddenly psychic characters at the end doesn't really appear to go with, Seldon's mathematics. But on the other hand, I think they're trying to set up for the mule. I think they're setting up the mule for season 2 or something. And they want to set up the idea of random mutations, throwing the mathematics into disarray.
Yeah. So I mean, in fairness to the show, there is the idea of like paranormal mental abilities in the Foundation stories, right? So there's the mule who can sort of telepathically dominate other people and cause them to feel whatever he wants them to feel. And then I still haven't read the third book, but my understanding is that in the third book, there's the second Foundation where there's sort of these Foundation people have sort of been training their mental abilities. So yeah, it's not completely out of left field if you know the source material, But I think in the book my understanding is there's basically only telepathy. There's not any kind of precognition or predicting the future or anything like that.
Right, and the mule was the only one.
I think that's correct. Actually, I don't think the mule could predict the future. He could just control other people.
Yeah.
That's the part of it that sort of disappointed me here. I mean, I wouldn't have minded if they had telepathy or even some kind of way of controlling other people's volition, but that did seem like they were going off in a tangent there. So, but I have to say that despite these things, I thought that it was the Empire part of the story I thought was really quite interesting and intriguing. I was drawn into it, and you had things like the downing of the space elevator, which is a tremendously spectacular moment, which wasn't in Asimov's books, but I feel that visual science fiction has to give you that sort of thing. But the all the stuff going on Terminus was less engaging to me, and I wish that there had been more of a kind of what the Foundation being having to use a intellect and diplomacy to get around these other people who have armies, okay, and guns and things like that. So that and also the idea that Harry Seldon shows up periodically and intervenes through his predictive recordings that he made of himself. And I guess they sort of did that at the end with when he shows up, but it didn't seem like it was working quite the same way.
Yeah, well, because he seems to be sent. He seems to be sent like a sentient AI rather than a recording in the TV show.
Right.
It was funny, John. Actually, when the terrorists destroy the space elevator, so the terrorists like blow up the space elevator and then it crashes down onto Trantor, which is the city planet, and blasts out this trench, like hundreds of miles long or something. It was reminding me of when I interviewed you about The Moon and the Other, and you said, at the end of the book that you had to have some big, like disaster, that if they ever make it into a movie, that there would be some big explosion stuff.
You've got to have a scene where they have to do CGI. Okay, if you don't have a scene where they have to do CGI, then you have failed in your writing.
Yeah. Yeah, so they definitely did that here, and it was really spectacular and everything. I guess, Anthony, since you are, I think the books the best of any of us. Do you want to comment on any things we were saying about the telepathic powers? Are we getting this all right?
Yeah, that is my understanding as well, and I would also add that to me, one of the other negative elements of that is that in the books, when the mule is introduced, the whole idea is that he could not be predicted by psychohistory because he is a mutant and an individual. And the existence of just one mutant with this power is able to essentially fully or almost entirely collapse the Seldon plan. And they basically have to spend an entire book and a half trying to put it back into place. And so the idea that you could have a whole bunch of different superpowered mutants running around the galaxy and the Seldon plan and psychohistory still making any sense, that's, I mean, again, we haven't really seen how they're going to execute on the mule, but it doesn't seem like already like psychohistory is starting to seem very, very shaky and mystical. And in general, I fully agree with your rant about that it lost a lot of the things that made the stories distinctly Asimovian. And I think they tried to make up for that by sort of turning science and math into this kind of like mantra that the characters repeat over and over. Trust the math, trust the science. But there was no sense of actual rigor or process or anything. It was just like this kind of empty phrase. And to me, I don't think that I had to it was just something I had to get over to enjoy the show. I had to say, this is not the stories. I mean, and it is sort of strange because the first episode is a pretty close adaptation of the first Foundation story with a few elements added. But after that, it really kind of just goes in its own directions. And so I could appreciate it for the things that it introduced. There were a lot of, I think, fun and interesting story elements, but it was only distantly related to the stories. And where it was related, it felt like really wasn't true to a lot of what I found interesting about those stories. And so I had to really adjust my expectations in order to enjoy the show despite that. I would say that one exception where they did invent something, but it felt very true to Asimov, was when we see Gale's childhood on Synax, and you see this planet kind of descending into ignorance due to this like very oppressive religion while the oceans are rising. None of that. And then you see this one person like clinging, discovering math and science and clinging to that and having her kind of use that to escape. Like none of that's in the Foundation books, but that felt like very much in the spirit of Asimov. And I would have loved to see more elements like that.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed very Asimovian, but then the treatment of religion elsewhere didn't, because Asimov, has a very scientific, rationalist, atheistic point of view. But then in the show, there's this, that John was mentioning, there's this religion of like the maiden mother and crone, and then there's the implication that the emperor doesn't have a soul, and there's the robot, Demerzel, who seems to subscribe to this religion. Like all that stuff, it just, it seemed very un-Asimov to me, like how not scientific and rational the universe that the story is set in seems to be.
Some of that I liked in the sense that I think that because Asimov was such a committed atheist, it was sometimes harder for him. In general, I think world building is not necessarily his strong suit. And so the show improves on that in a number of ways, that the galaxy just feels richer and stranger. And one element of that I'm fine with is that you have a much stronger sense of what the different religions are and the roles that they play in people's lives. But certainly that scene that you and John are talking about, where there's a very strong implication that the Emperor has no soul because he's a clone. I don't think Asimov would believe that clones are less human than us, and also Asimov definitely didn't believe in the idea of souls, so it would be a moot question.
Yeah, I mean, Abby, what did you make of that whole, the way religion and mysticism is presented in this universe?
Yeah, I do agree that felt very anti-Asimov. Yeah, and it was interesting, but I felt like it makes the world building a little more shaky. I'm a little bit less interested in where it's going, because if it's mysticism, it's sort of like anything goes. It leaches the tension out of a story.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mentioned this. Oh, go ahead, John.
Well, I think that I like the idea that there would be religion, more than one religion, and people through the galaxy would have these beliefs. But the fact that there is apparently some mystical truth to the beliefs, that's the part that makes it a little woo-woo. In other words, as a human phenomenon, religion is always with us. Okay, maybe I don't know that about 10,000 years in the future whether people will be without religion, but I suspect that at least some people will still be very much engaged with religion. So that didn't bother me. In other words, that the existence of religion and it being powerful and it having effects on political disputes and things like that. But the idea that, we just did a test on the Emperor and we see that he doesn't have soul. It's like, Asimov would not have spent any time on that.
Yeah, I mean that's I like the idea that of that there's like that religion, that it tackles religion and there's different religions and everything. And I don't even mind that religion is true or ambiguously true in a story in general or a science fiction story in general. It's just specifically in this story, this Asimov story, that seems totally at odds with how he did and would write it. So even just beyond that, though, I feel like it just makes a lot of the conversations kind of boring because like, I mean, we'll get to, I guess we should get to Salvor Hardin, who's sort of the nominally the main character in this series. Or I guess, I don't know. I mean, there's sort of the Emperor, there's Salvor Hardin and Gale Dornick, I guess, are kind of the three. But Salvor Hardin is certainly a main character, but I just found so many of the conversations that she had so dull because they just seemed to be like so much of it was just like, what do I do? Oh, I'm you're no, Salvor, you're special. You're part of the plan. Like, like it's all going to work out, or like, and then she can like flip coins and predict how they're going to go and stuff. And it's just like, I just feel like whatever, I mean, I just prefer scientific rational stuff, just in general, but just on a purely storytelling level, it seemed to like take away so much of the interesting choices from her, or like interesting things that she would otherwise talk about, when so much of it is just this stuff about like, am I special? Like, what is my destiny, etc. So
there's a interesting thing that's taken from the Asimov books that is in the show, but it's changed, and that's that Salvor Hardin in one of the stories says that when they're dealing with the other nearby planets that are violent and threatening the Foundation, he says that violence is the last refuge of the incompetent, and that sounds very much like Asimov. But then in the show, what happens is it's Salvor Hardin's father who says violence is the exactly that. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent, and she replies that, well, that's just an old man's way of thinking. Okay, and I thought that was really sort of telling in a way that because we're going to have some violence in the show, and again, I don't necessarily object to that. I just takes it in a direction that I hope is not just all thought and blunder, as people have said about space opera.
Yeah. Well, I saw apparently the showrunner or somebody said like, oh, well, our Salvor Hardin, you're picking up the story earlier than the character in the books, and with the implication that she's going to grow into the sort of smooth political operator, wise and less impetuous and impulsive and everything. Which, okay, I mean, I hope that happens, but it still didn't make a lot of the scenes that she has in this season any less tedious to me. But I don't know if maybe other people liked that storyline more than I did. But
I liked the fact that some of the elements they introduced, like I hope I'm not getting the planets confused. I think it was Anacreon that was like bombarded, and then survivors of Anacreon like come to the Foundation, like looking to scavenge and then like capture this like important ship. And I thought like again, none of that really comes at all from the books, but that was an interesting. There were elements of an interesting story there, but Salvor herself, I agree, was not interesting, and again, because regardless of who she becomes, it's also just this sense that she's being put into this chosen one narrative, which A, is un-Asimovian, and B, just feels like we've seen it many times before.
Yeah. What? So okay. So we've got Cleon, Gail Dornick. Oh, I'll say like, so the one scene, probably my favorite scene in the whole show, was there's this scene with Gail Dornick where she's on this spaceship and it's heading for some destination, and the AI has been programmed not to tell her where they're going. And so she has to like use math and science and question the ship to see what information she can get, and sort of try to figure out where they're going, and ultimately, puts on a spacesuit and goes out to the exterior of the ship so that she can see the sky without the AI futzing with its view screens and stuff like that. And that was my favorite scene in the whole show, because that's like what I want out of a science fiction show, is like smart people doing smart stuff and solving problems, and and so I just wish there'd been a lot more of that in this season, because that was really compelling, and that was really well done. So I don't know, Abby, do you agree with that? Did you like that scene, or?
I did like that scene, yeah, and I 100% agree, 100% with what all of you were saying. Like intellectual conflict was kind of lacking.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to say.
It isn't. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking that in the books there is this situation that happens as the situation evolves, that as the empire fades and it loses control over the periphery of the galaxy, these individual little empires break out that are then in conflict with one another, and also in conflict with the empire, and also trying to conquer the Foundation. And so one of the plot drivers in the books is that the Foundation, having no army, has to somehow negotiate between all these people and play them off against one another and sort of use them and use its own, control of technology to manipulate the situation so that they'll survive and be there to, take over as the Galactic Empire fails. And so I think that's still in the series, but they're doing it more in terms of like military, so that the Foundation people are somehow going to be working with the Anacreons or whatever to get this spaceship that somehow is going to be a factor in their relationship with the Empire as it recedes. And so that in other words, the positioning of the Foundation is sort of similar, but it's not done in terms of diplomacy and dirty tricks. It's done more in terms of military force.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder what their like long-term plan is, and then maybe they felt like they needed like more action and more younger, impetuous characters and stuff in season 1 to kind of get people interested, and then more of the politics and conniving and all that stuff will come more in season 2. I mean, because we're by the end of season 1, we're up to like Harry Seldon has made basically his first appearance as a recording. I don't know if I think that might correspond more to his second appearance in the book. I'm not. Maybe Anthony would know this better than I do. But Anthony, what do you think about this idea that we're actually not that far? Like this season has not actually taken us that far along the timeline of the books, and so the stuff that we're kind of expecting from the books might come in season 2.
Well, I like it as an adaptation choice in the sense of like we were talking earlier about this question, like, oh my gosh, are there going to be a different cast for each episode? And so the idea that you really sort of deal with one Seldon crisis per season allows you to have a lot more continuity. And so the fact that we're like not very far into the books, I think was very smart. But at the same time, I am skeptical that the show in so many ways just seems so fundamentally un-Asimovian and not that interested in a lot of the things that at least that he was in with the Foundation stories. And so I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to start exploring that stuff more carefully in later seasons. I feel like the story will evolve, but tonally, philosophically, it feels pretty clear what kind of show they want it to be. And I guess maybe I'm just shielding myself from further disappointment. I don't want to go into season 2 being like, yes, this is the one where they're really going to be closer to the books. I think I feel much more comfortable saying, except that they're using some of the iconography of the books, some of the ideas of the books, but they're telling their own story. And if it intersects with Asimov at some point, that'll be fun and interesting, but don't expect any of that.
Yeah.
It's funny, what you describe, Anthony, is really my reaction to The Man in the High Castle, which I know we did a show about that because I value that novel immensely. And the fact that the TV show basically throws most of it away really made it hard for me. I kept waiting. I said, well, the second season, they're going to pull it back, and then the second season they didn't. And so I stopped watching it. And the difference here is that I don't sort of revere the Foundation trilogy as much as I do Philip K. Dick. And so in a way, I'm willing to let them, okay, you're not going to do Asimov, and maybe you shouldn't, maybe you couldn't, and as a TV show. So then but whatever you do, make it interesting and thought-provoking and not dumb. All right. And so I'm willing to let them go that way. Although I would like to see some Asimovian moments. I certainly want to see the mule as a character and his engagement with the whole situation come up. I saw that, as Goyer said in an interview, that he thought that they could do 80 episodes of this to tell the whole story. 80 episodes? That's 8 seasons. I don't think so. I don't know.
Well, that would be impressive.
Well, I mean, because I have the sense that this is not super popular. So I mean, it has been renewed for a second season, but I certainly wouldn't count on it going to 8. I wouldn't count on it going to 3, let alone 8. Because I don't know, I haven't heard that many people talking about it or whatever. I mean, Abby, what's your impression of like how have you heard people talking about this show, or what's your impression?
No, I mean, I 100% agree. It's not being talked about, but maybe that's just because it's on Apple Plus, because maybe not that many people are subscribing.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a fair point. So yeah, I mean it might be that it it keeps going even if not that many people are watching it, because just not that many people are watching anything else on Apple Plus. So, but I don't know. Right. I just something.
Although if you contrast it with how many people are talking with Ted Lasso, which probably costs a tiny fraction that Foundation does, then I feel less optimistic about 8 seasons.
Yeah, but I mean it might have been. Yeah, the plan apparently I hadn't actually heard that, but yeah, if the plan was for this to go to 8 seasons, that might explain why so little of the book is in season 1, and it might have been a better plan to plan this for 2 or 3 seasons, and not have to invent so much stuff to fill up all those episodes.
Although the invention is, again, a lot of what I liked. I mean, that's part of what I feel torn about, is that I wish they'd used more from Asimov, but also in a lot of times when they were inventing things from whole cloth, I really enjoyed it. When it was like, we took something from Asimov and then treated it in this completely un-Asimovian way, then I was getting annoyed.
Well, I mean, as I said, I think I liked the Emperor storyline. I feel like that could almost just be its own show. But what did you like that was not the Emperor storyline?
I guess it was mainly the Emperor storyline.
Okay.
And again, I thought some of the backstory about Anacreon, although to your point, I feels like half the cast, no one on the cast agrees on how to pronounce Anacreon, or yeah, and
Anacreons?
Yeah, but yeah, Anacreons, or who knows.
Yeah,
and I liked some of Gale's storyline, although it definitely. I didn't love all of it, but there were elements of it that I found pretty interesting.
Well, I guess let's just talk about the Emperor storyline, since that seems to be the part we like the best, even though it has nothing to do with really psychohistory or anything. But because yeah, so what happens is that it turns out that I don't know should I get into this now? So basically, I don't know how early this comes in. I forget, but maybe 3 or 4 episodes in. We finds out that the young emperor, the Dawn, is suicidal, and it eventually comes out that he knows that he's not actually a perfect something has gone wrong with his cloning process, and he knows that he's not a perfect clone of the other, the older versions, and as soon as this is discovered, they're going to kill him, and so he's very upset about this. So Abby, you want to talk about what did you think of that story? Did that grab you?
That really grabbed me, yeah. And I was losing interest, as you guys all said, in the Terminus storyline. So that kind of kept me going for the last 3 or 4 episodes of the season. Yeah, I was interested. I mean, because you feel sorry for me. He's like one of the only characters I felt like I wanted to root for him. I was like, well, he's stuck in this weird, oppressive culture, in this weird, oppressive palace, in a dying empire. With his brothers, his clone brothers, possibly ready to kill him.
Yeah, and he also doesn't.
And then the woman he falls in love with is pretty clearly trying to use that to manipulate him. Okay, or at least you wonder whether that's indeed what she's doing. So that story was pretty interesting, and then the way it culminated, I thought was quite, one of the most dramatic moments of the whole season.
Yeah. So spoiler warning. I guess we haven't even really talked about Demerzel, which we're going to have to talk about to get into that climax there. But so the Emperor has this advisor named Demerzel, who's this immortal robot who's been around at least since the reign of Cleon the First. The guy who they're all clones of. And we don't know a ton about her really. She's not from either of the books I've read, but apparently she's from some of the other books. Anthony, do you want to fill us in on this?
Yes, I can fill you in. This is a bit of a spoiler for the books, if that's okay.
Okay, spoiler for the books. Anthony.
Okay, so So what is revealed ultimately is that yes, in the prequel novels there is an advisor character, the Emperor, called Demerzel, who you ultimately discover is actually R. Daniel Oliva, the robot detective from Asimov's early robot novels, and he's survived for thousands of years, secretly shaping human history. And so that's who that character is. I mean, I don't think that's exactly what the show's character is supposed to be, but that's the origin.
Interesting. Yeah. Apparently, in my research, apparently they can't use the name R. Daniel Oliva because that's part of the iRobot IP. So even if they wanted to, they couldn't mention that.
Right.
But so what did you think of what do you think of this Demerzel character? Is she consistent with the books as you understand them, or is this sort of a departure as well?
I mean, she's definitely a very compelling character on her own terms. It's hard to sort of exactly square her up with my understanding of how robots work in Asimov's robot novels, because there's the whole 3 laws of robotics. Although part of, and I don't think they get into too much detail in the later Foundation books about this, but at this point, Demerzel / Daniel's understanding of the laws of robotics has become much more sophisticated and driven by the zeroth law, so that you can sort of justify anything as long as it's serving the broader purposes of humanity. And so even though Demerzel, certainly kills somebody, and also in other ways seems to operate
couple people,
right, and operate with independence from not really needing people's orders and things like that. So, but I think you could actually argue that that's still consistent with how this ancient robot who's had thousands of years to think about how best to serve humanity would be in a lot of ways pretty mysterious and pretty ruthless. I definitely want to see more of Demerzel, because I feel like I don't necessarily have a great sense of her yet. Or I mean, I feel like there's lots of tantalizing hints, but I couldn't describe her comprehensively. And then I think you alluded to earlier, she also is a member of this religion, and I mean, actually a very devout member, and that you get the sense that her loyalty to the religion is the one thing that supersedes her loyalty to empire. And I did find that very interesting. Even if you use, I mean, I liked it in this, and again, this is very un-Asimovian, but getting at this idea that you would think that this perfectly logical robot would just see any kind of religious faith as fundamentally a sham. But the idea that a robot could still find value in this, I find very compelling and interesting, even if, again, I don't think Asimov would do that. Or I think because he does have a story in iRobot where a robot finds religion, but that robot is treated as fundamentally delusional, whereas that's not the case here.
Yeah. All right, so I want to get back to John. So, John, you want to talk about the climax of the story and why you liked it so much?
Well, I mean, I guess it's sort of like a Game of Thrones kind of thing, where a character thinks that he's in control of a situation or is trying to escape from a dire situation, and has allies, and then in the end, it turns out he's been completely manipulated, and also, he has had no freedom. And so that I think, the thing with the clone emperor, it's very much an image of a kind of ultimate autocrat, lasting over centuries. And so that really, is borne out there by what happens to the youngest of the 3, when he tries to,
yeah. Well, well, let me just explain. Yes. So yeah, there's this young clone emperor, and he knows he's going to be killed if his secret is discovered. And so this woman who works at the palace pretends to be in love with him and sort of sneaks him out of the palace. But then it turns out that she's part of this resistance movement, and there's this other illegal clone of him that they've made, and they're planning to have the illegal clone who's part of the resistance impersonate the young clone and sort of infiltrate the imperial court. That didn't seem to make any sense to me at that point in the story, since he's like on the run and they know he's a defective clone and everything. I didn't understand how their plot was going to work at that point at all. I don't know if that made any more sense to anyone else than it did, if I'm missing something or.
Oh, you mean why would they let him escape to that degree? I mean,
No. Why would the resistance think at that point that they could just like have their clone waltz back into the palace and not just be killed?
Yeah, I wondered that too. I mean, I don't think you're supposed to think too hard about it.
Okay. Okay, but so those quibbles aside, so then it turns out that there's a lot of like twist to this story, but it turns out that this young clone has been tracked by the sort of intelligence services from the palace, and they let him go so that he could lead them to the resistance, and now they've captured all the resistance people. And so now he's been recaptured and taken back to the palace. But by this point, the Day clone has had this sort of religious experience and has discovered newfound empathy, sort of newfound reserves of empathy, and decides to spare him. But then Demerzel, I prefer Demerzel myself, kills him. So Abby, what did you think of all those crazy twists?
I was really engaged. I of course was disappointed at the end, the way he was just killed. So sad.
You wanted him to keep living?
Yeah, I thought he would have been a good character for the next season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get why Demerzel killed him. Okay, it just didn't seem. I don't know. One of the things that you mentioned, the brother Day evolving some empathy. Well, but when he catches the rebel woman, he basically says, "I'm going to destroy every person who's ever had contact with you in your entire life."
That was pretty badass. That was pretty badass. I like that.
That was very, that to me was the image of an ultimate kind of insane autocrat. Okay, not anyone who has any sense of. I mean, you think about it. The emperor is supposed to be supposedly ruling for the benefit of the entire galaxy, but in this particular instance, anyway, he's completely impervious to any humane emotions. So that I guess one of the things I liked about the Emperor's story is that there were moments where you felt like, okay, well, these are regular people here, okay, who are stuck in a system themselves that they're brought up in, and they're struggling to do the things they're supposed to do, but also are moved by impulses of power, and so that it's not all black and all white, but it seems to be going pretty much all black by the end of the season.
Well, but he clearly has like. Experience walking this salt spiral thing has made him somehow has changed, because before he did that, obviously he would have just executed the young clone instantly, it seems. Right. So obviously he's developed some sort of empathy, maybe just to versions of himself or something, but he's undergone some kind of change. Yeah,
he learned self-love, and by self-love we mean clones. Yeah.
Well, he also has changed. He's different from Dusk, because there's also this whole debate where originally Dusk is the one who's going to go quell this, religious debate that is like undermining their dynasty, and then Day steps in and says, no, I'm gonna, like, because I guess traditionally Day stays on Trantor, and Dusk, the oldest brother, is the one who is dispatched for diplomacy, skullduggery, things like that. But there's a sense that Day is already somewhat different from the Cleons before him, perhaps also because he is a bit disillusioned by seeing the fallout from some of the earlier events of the show, where the day we're introduced to at the beginning of the show responds so brutally to the collapse of the space elevator that they're still dealing with fallout from that, and so there's a sense that Day says, hey, the way we've been doing things before isn't working. We need to change things up.
Right. There's also this additional crazy twist where it turns out that the Resistance has somehow contaminated the DNA of the Emperor, the original Cleon the First that they have sort of frozen in the basement, and so all of them are now are not actually perfect clones of him. So I mean, I guess it's possible that this Day might have a slightly different personality because of that. But let's come back though to so why does Demerzel kill the young clone? I mean, she says after she does it, she says something like, I'm loyal to Empire. And I had the impression that she has some sort of directive given to her by Cleon the First to protect his lineage that she can't supersede. So I don't know, does everyone buy that, or was there more going on there?
My sense was that it was also just because it was like the first real schism we've seen between day and dusk, and that, you know, the part of the whole idea of the Empire is that we are one person in three bodies. And so if you have like the two adult Cleons really fundamentally feuding over this huge topic, like that could tear the Empire apart. And so she's like, I'm going to just end this debate right now and just nip this in the bud.
I guess there also might be the implication that she was not happy that he made her kill the priestess or whatever. Was it Halima or something? And so maybe, I don't know, there was maybe a slight implication that this was like her revenge. That, you know, you killed Halima, so I'm going to kill this young clone that you're now so attached to.
Yeah, I mean, I think Demerzel's behavior it remains kind of very mysterious in a way that feels very intentional as opposed to just confusing, at least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, like, why'd she rip her face off? Very, very, very mysterious.
That's just a classic robot move, you know.
Yeah, because she's a robot. Go ahead, John.
The way she holds herself all the time, it looks like she has stomach cramps. It doesn't look very happy.
I actually thought that was kind of cool, the way she always has her arms sort of at her elbows at a 45-degree angle and her hands held over her stomach, sort of. Yeah, that is. I thought all the actors in this were actually great. I mean, you know, some of them I wish they had better material to work with, but I thought like the actress did a great job with that. I mean, I think she does a really good job playing a sort of inscrutable robot woman. Okay, we're coming up a little bit on time here. So, Abby, is there anything else about the show? Any other topics that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess like we could just say like, I'll probably watch the second season, or I'll probably like give it a chance, but I'm not fully engaged. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So John Kessel, how are you feeling right now about season 2?
I'm sort of with Abby on this. I'll probably watch it, but it's not really drawn me in the way some other series have done. And I guess it's hard to put my finger exactly on. It seems like there's a lot of a lot of plot going on. Okay, that's sort of seems sort of arbitrary at times, and I'm not engaged as much with the characters as I might be, especially the ones on Terminus. That whole thing. So that's a it's not just not drawn me in. Although again, it's well made, but it's not It's not really got the kind of human engagement that really would pull me in.
Yeah. Anthony, how are you feeling about season 2?
I feel sort of similar in the sense that I think if it was on Netflix or Hulu or one of the other services that I subscribe to regularly, I would probably make time for it just because I'm curious about where it goes, and it's well made enough that I would continue. The fact that I don't regularly subscribe to Apple TV Plus, and I did specifically to watch the show. Would I do that again? I'm not sure. I do think that the revelations in the final episode about Salver being Gail's daughter, and then like the time jump, they did make me a bit more interested in where the show is going, or at least they surprised me. But yeah, I can't say that I will probably watch it, but it's not something that I'm like eagerly waiting until the second season comes out.
One of the basic things about plotting is that you have things that are looked forward to as well as things that happen in the past that lead up to where you are now. And I don't have a good sense of where we're looking forward to. It seems to me that there aren't particular expectations unless you read the books. If you just watched the series and got to the end of the first season, what are you looking forward to here? Okay, we jumped forward 130 years, and I'm not sure that there's any kind of expectations, left there. And I think that may be an issue.
Yeah. That's an interesting, so the only way I'm optimistic is if, like I said, like they sort of felt like they wanted to do something a little more actiony, a little more traditional for season 1. And then now that Salvor and Gail are kind of reunited on, I think, and I assume they'll go back to Terminus, and lead the Foundation or something. That maybe we'll have more stories that involve more, like the challenges of leadership and political maneuvering and stuff like that. And then obviously there's the mule coming in, which we all in our last panel we all said that's the best part of the story. So that could liven things up if that happens. So those are the kind of two things I'm holding on to for liking the series more. But yeah, I guess I just, and I feel bad being so like sort of blah about the series. Like when I gave a more positive review last week to Ghostbusters Afterlife than I'm giving to this, I feel like, but I just like, I really wanted something. It's because the production values are so high and the visuals are so great and the cast is so talented, and I just wanted something Asimovian, and it just doesn't feel that Asimovian to me. So that's kind of a bummer. Also, actually, this was interesting because I just went back and listened to our last panel, and Anthony, you had this quote where you said, Samuel R. Delaney says that one reason that Foundation has never been adapted for film or TV is because it would instantly turn every kid into a Marxist. So I don't know
if
that
would have happened.
Now that this has been adapted for TV, has every kid instantly turned into a Marxist? Because I might have missed that. But
if it had been more faithful and more kids had watched it, maybe that would have worked. But sadly, we will know. At least for now, we won't know because it's not a particularly faithful adaptation.
Yeah, I feel like that just really says a lot about just the chasm between how much about ideas the book is versus how much not about ideas this show is, because I don't feel like this is going to like affect anyone's thinking or about anything really in any way. And like a Foundation series should affect, so that should be what one of the primary things is it makes you think. And I don't know if this is really going to make anyone think about anything.
If they had kept that young Dawn Emperor alive at the end of it, I think more people might be engaged into season 2 because they'd be having someone to root for. Yeah.
It is funny. It is sort of interesting again that the part of the show we all like the most is the thing that has nothing to do. I guess maybe the people working on the show are, are better at sort of coming up with their own stories than adapting Asimov's, which again, I mean, to be fair, is we all knew going in was a hugely difficult thing to adapt faithfully. And especially, I wonder with a lot of these things, like, a lot of times I get so angry at the writers, and then I find out later that there's all sorts of studio pressure and interference and notes and stuff, and that the writers were really doing their best to keep it faithful to the books. And just, like there's like 100 different people who all offer suggestions, and, by the time it goes through all those people, there's just not much left of whatever you were trying to do in the first place. And I don't know, there might have been some of that going on here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not something I'm angry about or anything, or that I feel like they've betrayed Asimov. It's more just a sense of, probably there was no way you were going to do a particularly faithful adaptation of Foundation, and how much of that was a creative decision from the outset and how much of that was imposed by Apple, I don't know. But that, I think part of the process of watching the show is making peace with that idea. I do wish that it does feel sometimes a little disingenuous when Apple and Goyer have like gone out and talked about how much they revere Asimov and things like that. And I'm kind of like, well, that's kind of like setting people up for some disappointment. But I think I just had to sort of accept that this was a completely different thing. But to your guys' point, I think there are elements of this new thing that are very interesting, and then other elements of it that I'm kind of like, meh, it's not that great.
Yeah, and Asimov's daughter, Robin Asimov, is listed as a producer. I don't know what sort of involvement she had, but yeah, I mean, they did at least seem to sort of be making some sort of effort in the direction of, paying tribute to him.
Right. Oh, and the other thing I would say about that is I was going to say that I am certainly very hopeful that this will just bring more attention to the books, which I love so much. I am worried a little bit because I was talking to a friend who has not read the books, but has seen the show, and she was actually really liked a lot of the show and was excited to see how they translate, where they came from in the books, and everything she liked in the show. I was like, oh, that's not in the books. That's not in the books. That's not in the books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, I could see, I could definitely see if you haven't read the books and you have no particular expectations going into this, you might just be like, this is, it's a pretty good science fiction show. The special effects are good. The cast is good. There's some interesting ideas. It's just, it's just sort of maybe a letdown, for us. But yeah, maybe it's possible that other people might like it more. I mean, like, I think it's like 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's not, it hasn't been panned. I mean, it's sort of average response, it seems like, from most people.
It's not getting the big Game of Thrones reaction, although Game of Thrones I thought might have taken a few years to get to that point. So I don't know.
Oh, that to me that was like, you went from 10 to 0, -10.
So yeah, I don't know. I think we've pretty much covered it. So yeah, I guess let's get into some final thoughts. So Abby, anything else? Any final thoughts here at the end?
I'll just say, like, I agree that the production value is really outstanding. The artwork, the score of the music, all of that was just like so much time and effort and craft went into this. It's hard to watch it wasted on like kind of a little bit weak storytelling, which I agree, intellectually it wasn't very stimulating. Mm-hmm. So it's hard sometimes to see that if you're somebody that cares about story.
Yeah, I guess I will say again, I did really enjoy the first episode, so maybe I would just say, at least watch the first episode. It's a really quite good, I thought, adaptation of that first story in the Foundation book. So, do you agree with that? Would you recommend people watch the first episode?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I really think they did try their best. To me, like, I think that if somebody asked me to adapt the Foundation, the first Foundation book, that's a hard thing to ask. I mean, to make it like palatable to the masses, basically, because it had so little action. It's all talking heads. And that doesn't play well to, a mass audience. So I expected, you needed to add some action. Just, you need characters to root for if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, final thoughts.
Well, I think it was a tough thing to try to adapt, and I think that they've done some things really quite well, but it doesn't have the kind of, I don't know. I think Asimov doesn't really provide, the kind of adventure story that I think that the people think of when they think of a galactic empire story. So, I think that it's a little disappointing. It's funny. I think about, well, where's the adaptation of Alfred Bester's "The Star's My Destination"? Okay, that one, starts off like a rocket. Okay, so to speak. And there are other. I like the idea that they're investing in classic works of science fiction. Okay, too often they just ignore stuff that's been written and make up things that are sort of bad Xeroxes. But in this case, there are other works that I would anticipate would be fun to see adapted. So maybe, the problem is if it flops, then no one's going to drop, hundreds of millions of dollars on another series of this sort.
I wonder, could someone just make a fan edit of just the Emperor storyline? Because it doesn't intersect with the other stories at all in this season, right? Like you could just separate it out and watch it on its own, right?
I think so.
Yeah, more or less, except for the very beginning.
Especially after the first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's what I'd recommend. Watch the first episode and then the supercut of the Emperor storyline, and that's actually pretty entertaining. So Anthony, final thoughts?
I basically agree with what everyone said. That I think it's. Oh, maybe I would spin it slightly more positively to say that I think it is a pretty good science fiction TV show, and it's both, I think, a mark of how much I love the books and also how much pretty good TV there is now that is not necessary. That feels more disappointing than maybe it would have 10 or 20 years ago. But now it feels, I think I think they did about as good a job as you could adapting the books, but it doesn't feel essential.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point is that, the positive way to put it was that, back in the 90s or early 2000s, you just expected every adaptation of a classic science fiction novel to be an absolute travesty. And, the fact that I think if we had gotten this back then, we would be like, oh, wow, that was one of the most faithful adaptations of a classic science fiction book I've ever seen. So, yeah, it does say like a lot about, I guess, how much better TV has gotten and how much more respect science fiction has in Hollywood that we're so disappointed by this when, iRobot was sort of the standard not all that long ago.
That's a very well taken point, it seems to me. If I had seen this when I was young, I would have just been on the floor with my jaw drop about it's intelligently made by people who want to do a good job. So very well acted. Really good people in the roles. So, have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we're just not the right audience for this. But yeah, maybe someone who's hasn't read the books or who's younger or whatever might really love this. I'd be curious. If people are listening who just love this, I'd be curious to hear from you. I always like it when people are enthusiastic about science fiction. But it wasn't what I was looking for. But had a lot going for it. So. And it could improve in season 2 or be more kind of what I want in season 2. So I would definitely be curious to see if that happens. And so maybe if it does, we can come back and talk about season 2. But we are all out of time, so for now we're going to have to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Anthony Ha, John Kessel, and Abby Goldsmith. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Anthony Ha, John Kessel, and to Abby Goldsmith for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.